welcome back to our live stream from a Berlin studio. We are in the middle of an 8-hour TV marathon in support for Ukraine. I'm Sergej Sumlenny from the European Resilience Initiative Center. This stream has been prepared for you and been run for you by the European Resilience Initiative Center and the Silicon Curtain podcast by Jonathan Fink. I'm very sorry, Jonathan Fink. And you will have Jonathan soon. You have got that question. Where is Jonathan? Like on that last session, we had Roderick Kiesewetter, Gustav Grassel, we had Sascha Ostanina, we had William Albert. But where is Jonathan? Jonathan will join us in the next panel. He has already run one panel. Now he will join us in the next panel. Stay with us. And now we will talk on this special panel on the topic of how do the Western countries and NATO train Ukrainian army, and who is a trainer and who is a trainee in this constellation? We are talking here in studio with Sascha Ostanina. She is a policy fellow at Jacques Delors Center in Berlin, a think tank close to the Heritage School. And we will have online joining us Jahara Frankie Matisek. He's a lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Air Force, and he is a military professor at U.S. Naval College. Am I right? And also we have Will Renaud, who is a professor at the Northwestern University. And what I need to stress, they both are non-visiting fellows at the European Resilience Initiative Center in our organization, and that is actually the first time we see us both at one broadcasting together after we have started that fellowship. Thank you that we have that stellar constellation of the ERIC fellows. Great to see you now. And I would like to ask this question to the whole round and check who could answer it first. The basic question is, who is the trainee? Who is the trainer? Can the Western Army, NATO Army, teach Ukrainians how to fight? We have had recently an interview with a Ukrainian legionnaire, with Malcolm Nance, and he said the US Army hasn't seen such fights since the Battle of Ardennes, and it was some 80 years ago. So can we teach Ukrainians?
Yeah, thanks. I do have to obviously do my usual DoD disclaimer that the views that me and Professor Reno espouse are our own, do not reflect U.S. government policy, U.S. Air Force, or Department of Defense. That being said, so when it comes to the trainers and the trainees, the perspective of the trainers, whether it's U.S. forces or the Canadians or other militaries of Europe that are currently training the Ukrainians, one of the bigger disconnects that we're seeing, and this is just sort of the the cost-risk balance, for the Ukrainians versus the West when it comes to doing the training, is that the Ukrainians need people. They need bodies and they need people on the front. And within that inherent tension, there's expectations to just get the Ukrainians to be good enough. And yet, obviously, when we talk to a lot of the Western trainers, they're also conflicted, basically wishing that they maybe had double or triple the time with the Ukrainian trainees to make them as effective as possible. And obviously from a Ukrainian perspective, again, they just need people, and they need them to at least have some of the training. And so, that creates a very odd tension, not to mention the fact that a lot of the Ukrainians we would talk to as they're getting trained, the ones that had actual combat experience, didn't appreciate the way they were being trained, because they felt like they were being taught to fight a war they do not actually fight in Ukraine. And so this is creating lots of frustrations among the trainers and the trainees. Will, Reno, do you have anything else to add on to this, please?
Maybe the training in Europe is the wrong model, because the idea is that, that you train these soldiers in, basic battlefield tactics. And in terms of the fight that Ukrainians are in now, I think most Ukrainians, at least if they have experience in the front and then come for training, they find it sort of remedial, but then they're mixed with people who might not have been in battle before. So, that's not a very efficient classroom. because you have to decide, do you want to go at the speed of people who have more expertise and try to supplement their skills, or do you need to have some sort of specialized training for the group that might be further behind? But we find that they get mixed together, that European trainers, that NATO trainers don't necessarily have a lot of information about who they're training before they actually arrive. So that's another point of friction, something else that slows it up. Ask me. I'm not a professional trainer or anything like that. I think I would design the curriculum a little bit differently. That said, training is also a political signal. So, even if you have inefficiencies in training, and that's not a criticism necessarily of the skill of the trainers themselves, who I think are highly professional, but rather, it's a question of how it's put together on the whole. But the fact that Ukrainian soldiers travel to Germany or to UK or wherever for training, that there's a utility in that political signal. So, I think that talking about training, there are several different dimensions to discuss.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Frankie. It was very inspiring. I will come back to you after I ask Sascha the next question. And I know that you have authored at the Jacques Delors Center in Berlin a paper analyzing results of the training mission for Ukraine. You have interviewed a lot of Ukrainian soldiers from the very low level, like private or sergeants, up to pretty high level of officers who were accompanying their unit. What was the overall result? Was this training mission a success, partly success, a flop?
It is still difficult to say if it's a success or a flop because the mission is still running. So it has started in November 2022, and it was supposed to run for 2 years, but then got extended for a couple of more months. I wrote one paper and then I did one field research on that topic. So I had a privilege to consider how the mission is functioning in this protracted time frame. So I did see how the mission has developed and how both the Ukrainian side that organizes who's coming to Germany to which courses and the Bundeswehr themselves trying to adjust to each other. And I think these relationships are mutually beneficial from my side, but mutually disadvantageous from the other side. And I explain why. Mutually beneficial is because there are different skill sets that both German soldiers and other soldiers from other European countries that participate in this mission possess and that they could share with the Ukrainians. For instance, nighttime fighting. This is one of the biggest difficulties at the moment for the Ukrainian army, not exclusively because the Ukrainian soldiers are not that professionalized in nighttime fighting. It's also a question of the lack of equipment. But still, those skills need to be trained, and this is one of the area where the EU mission and Ukrainian soldiers managed to establish this beneficial cooperation. On the other side, the Ukrainians possess an enormous knowledge about mine clearance and mining activities of the Russians, and this is where the EU side of the trainers that benefit from this Ukrainian knowledge and trying to take as much lessons as possible. But on the other side, there are many difficulties that could have been, as Frankie and Will Renaud said, could have been fixed already by this time, and both sides are still running into these difficulties. One of them being trainees having a very different skill sets and need to somehow adjust to each other within a very short period of time. It's 4 to 6 weeks. There is also a difficulty with drone employment into the training. So there are still, as Germans said, Luft nach oben. There is still room for development for this mission to become even better.
Well, it is absolutely what some people from the audience write in the comments, pointing out the ambiguity of this training mission. For example, one of the viewers writes, Ukraine needs high-level training for command staff and large formations. This takes years to develop, but is essential for a successful large-scale operation. As far as I understand, there was no trained mission for high-rank officers, only for troops who fight directly with the enemy, like the platoon, battalion level. And another one is writing his question, all saying NATO doesn't really train independent countries' militaries. It tries mainly to get them all work together as one. So it's once again, it's about like a combined. It's not even combined armed. It's about like cooperating between military forces. What I experienced when I was talking to the Ukrainian soldiers in Ukraine, and on this stage, I ask you to pay attention to the donation link, which you can find in the description of this live stream, but also you can see now in the lower part of the screen a donation link and a QR code. We support the Ukrainian army with equipment which we may send to them as a German organization, and we are constantly in contact with them and bring them equipment they need. So when I talked to them, they said that, especially in the beginning, they had very special needs which they had, like how to pass a minefield, how to cross minefield, or how to efficiently use commercial scale drones, which they have a lot of them, or how they coordinate the usage of drones with artillery and other things. How can they do all these things which are vital for them and which are their daily life? And for all the questions, they had a very simple answer from the NATO instructors or EU instructors. Oh, we don't know, we never did it.
There are two views on that problem. First of all, yeah, it is true that the German army or any other European or NATO member state army doesn't have the understanding how the Ukrainians fight. And to solve this problem, there needs to be boots on the ground. It's not necessarily needs to be military boots per se, but it should be people who understand how military training works, what skill sets soldiers require in order to achieve specific aims. And unfortunately, that has not been yet the case. Unfortunately, EU or NATO member states are hesitant in sending observers to Ukraine to take those lessons. On the other hand, there is a different argument made by the EU side of the training that the general level of expertise and preparedness to fight in a war is relatively low, especially when it comes to people of older age. It's very difficult for them to get back in shape or to be able to combine just as simple warfighting techniques with something else, such as drone employment. And so in order to introduce more difficult tasks, they need to polish to a certain extent to the better stage, the more basic skill set. And it takes time. And if this basic skill set is polished, only then can they introduce something more difficult or more complex, such as nighttime training or drone employment. So yes, there is this discontent, but it has multiple root problems, and it's unfortunately is not solvable by just simply introducing more and more and more tasks to the training itself.
Yeah, we have one of comments which writes, training is useless if there is no ammo. I can only roger on that. But Frankie, you have a comment on that statement.
Yeah, well, this is the tough thing is, yes, like we need observers on the front, but the other difficulty is the fact that there is no standardization among all the different Ukrainian brigades. So a lot of it's all personality driven and education driven. And I think that's the other tough part is that when you hear the complaints of Ukrainian troops being trained by the Americans or Europeans or what have you, it's the fact that there isn't a coherent way in which Ukraine sends these people to these courses outside of Ukraine. And it's because they just get told at the last minute, we need to fill these courses with people, and they just do a random grab bag. And so again, that also creates extra frustrations, the fact that people are being sent to courses that they didn't volunteer for. I think one person that we met that Reno and Sascha and I met, the person was actually a drone operator for a year and a half, and he was on leave and randomly got sent to an advanced assault sapper course. And he's like, this isn't what I'm going to do, but apparently they needed bodies to do this course in Germany for 5 weeks. And so, yeah, I mean, and it is really difficult to, adapt and tailor these courses, when you don't know which unit this person's going to, because each unit on the front has a different command and control structure. Will Reno, you have anything else to add?
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Is it because there are a lot of stakeholders in organizing these courses? Where does this miscommunication come from to send a drone operator to do assault training is not a quite clever allocation of resources?
I'll defer to Will Reno if I think he has a pretty good answer to this.
I think that the problem is that an officer receives a command, which is that, okay, we got to send a bunch of guys for training in Germany. And then the guy goes to his subordinate and says, okay, we got 1 week, start picking people, get them together. And, this is a problem of command inside Ukraine. I'm not sure about the details of how this gets organized sort of at the initiation, but the execution seems to be somewhat haphazard. You look at that process alongside, for example, how specialized units in Ukraine recruit people, through social media, for example. And, so your skilled people who want to, be proficient and survive at the front, what they're looking for is they're looking for other people who are experienced, who are going to be able to protect them, while they fight and help them get skilled up. So I think that, one of the mismatches is that you have a training system that includes sending soldiers outside of Ukraine, through this bureaucratic process, but then you have Ukrainians themselves within their own military, who, like any other military, are trying to figure out in the fight how to identify people who have skills or have potential to have skills, and then try to attract them to places where they think that they're going to be useful. If there was some way to try to integrate that type of selection process for the soldiers who are sent outside of Ukraine for training, and then be able to integrate that with the expertise that German or British or whoever Polish trainers are able to offer, I think that would be a better model, but that takes a fair bit of coordination, which we don't see at present.
Thank you for this comment. I would like to elaborate, but I know that Frankie needs to run away to the next meeting. That's why I want to grab the opportunity and ask you, Frankie, when you meet all the Ukrainian soldiers, I know you have been to Germany a couple of weeks ago and to visit the training area. What is the most acute need? What is the most acute needed skill the Ukrainians tell you we want to learn that? And what do you think the NATO troops can learn from the Ukrainians?
It's the integration of drones and drones and drones. And the tough thing is, if you're a military trainer from any Western military country, our doctrine and tactics just have not caught up or adapted to the war in Ukraine. And so that's probably one of the biggest friction points. And, like the way the Germans told us that they were handling that is they're just like, we get it. You guys, keep telling us and giving us feedback. That's not how we do it. That's not how we do it, because we would use drones. And the Germans basically just say, well, we're just going to make you as good as we possibly can make you in, doing a trench assault. And so it's, I guess you could say, like, when all else fails, we'll just make you really good at the basics of doing trench assault. But again, even then, we met a lot of German officers who are like, we don't have any doctrine or manuals like for a modern day trench assault. So they were basically having to wing it by, a lot of these guys were telling us like, yeah, we had to like dust off all these old German manuals from World War I and World War II on how to do trench assault. And we just sort of used our common sense at looking at, videos on Twitter to try and, maximize a more realistic training environment. And we got to watch a couple of trench assaults, and I can tell you there were no drones involved, because they just like, we don't have the training or authorities or capabilities to do that. So again, it's a really tough situation right now, I think, for all the training programs. Will?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's German trainers have a lot to offer in terms of training and basic tactics, and that's actually important. Um, but the most efficient way to use the soldiers' time, I think, is to try to figure out what Ukrainian soldiers are actually proficient at. And there's an opportunity for mutual learning. I mean, if you have the right selection process and you get Ukrainian soldiers who might be more advanced in things like the integration of drones in small unit tactics, that's something that German trainers can offer opportunities, to improve skills, but they can learn at the same time. And I think if they're learning at the same time, what that does is that gives Ukrainian soldiers an opportunity to think about their own situation, their own context on the battlefield, and be able to develop ideas and integrate that maybe more systematically in their own doctrine and to improve skills. I mean, there are different ways to organize a curriculum, and one of the things that impressed, I think, both Frankie and me interacting with German trainers is that there is a fair bit of openness. There's some frustration among them, but it's a positive frustration, I think, in a way, because of all the European training that we've seen, I think that the German curriculum is the most well developed and the one that, at least in principle, is most open to flexibility. We can contrast that maybe with some of the others that we've seen.
Wanted to thank, I'm not sure if Jahara Frankie Matetic is with us still, if he's left or not. I want to thank him a lot for his expertise and for his insights. He's a Lieutenant Colonel of the US Air Force and a military professor at the US Naval College, and he is a non-visiting fellow at the European Resilience Initiative Center. And thank you, Dr. Will Renner, for what your insight offer us. And one more question, which I would love to ask you before I let you go and do your research business. Now, when you look at the results of what we have achieved now, like we have several brigades being completely trained in Germany, and they come back, they fight, they get restructured. And I know that some battalions which have been trained in Germany, they don't have any person anymore who has been trained in Germany. Not because they are killed in action or missed in action or wounded in action, but because they have been transferred to another unit, or someone got some another assessment, they don't do what they were trained to do, etc. Is this process too slow and too low scale?
The process of Western training, I mean, at the risk of maybe being too critical, I think it's also it's a question of the organization of Ukraine's military. I mean, why do people get moved around? What are the reasons for this? Why isn't expertise concentrated in certain kinds of units? And I think that this is part of the problem on both sides, is that you have different organizational cultures, and in order to make this third-party training work better, those organizational cultures and those interests have to be better aligned. And I think that this is a lot of what we've been seeing. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for NATO militaries to learn from Ukraine, because there's a process of organizational learning that's organic at frontline areas. And unlike Frankie, I'm able to travel in Ukraine, and you do see people that innovate.
Boots on the ground to get first-hand experience and knowledge is the key part for the NATO trainees to know what they train. But the NATO soldiers may not go to Ukraine. We know that no US soldier may enter Ukraine, active soldier, to get that experience, even not for a fight, just for collecting information, for making interviews, for talking to people. Is that a problem?
I think it's a big problem. And, politically, I'm not going to be able to solve that problem. I could offer a different model of training, which is what I would do is I would I would ask Ukraine authorities, send people that you can afford to send who already have skills, who you think are really good at what you do in the type of war that you're fighting. Bring them to NATO countries, and there's a process of mutual learning that can go on, because if the Ukrainian has to train the NATO soldier, in that process of training the NATO soldier, at least explaining what their battlefield conditions are and what kind of needs that they have, which is important information, for governments and militaries that want to give further assistance to Ukraine. But in that process of explaining what they do, they also learn. And I think that rather than this kind of, primary school top-down, guy who hasn't had the experience of these Ukrainian soldiers training these Ukrainian soldiers, as best he can, that, some other kind of model would work a lot better. Maybe it would result in fewer Ukrainian soldiers being trained, but I think that it would be a mutually more beneficial type of arrangement. And some of the German trainers that we talked to, in some ways, they think about models like this. How do you turn the student into an instructor in a way that benefits the student and aligns the instructor with what the student's actual conditions are and what the student's actual needs are. And that's something that there are all kinds of experiments in military training. Assistants, for example, struggle against colonial rule. That Scandinavians had a lot of experience with this, decades ago. How do you actually understand what it is that, the person who's being trained needs? And you have to get your head into their experience in order to provide that kind of beneficial curriculum. And, unfortunately, NATO soldiers can't go to those places and see that directly and then take that knowledge. But there are other ways to do that I'll leave it to the politicians to figure out the other stuff. But
absolutely,
but
absolutely. Military personnel should do military stuff, and military professors study their field, and the politicians should do their job. They cannot hide behind the backs of the experts. Thank you so much. It was Dr. Will Reno, who is a professor at the Northwestern University and the chair there, and he's also a non-visiting fellow at the European Resilience Initiative Center. Thank you so much for your insight, Dr. Reno. And I'm coming back to Sascha Ostanina, who is a policy fellow at the Jacques Delors Center in Berlin. We have one of questions from our audience saying that the number of types of weapons which Ukraine has been provided and Ukraine has to use is one of the key reasons for the problems in the Ukrainian army. And that is also what I read in your paper, which you published on the types of ammunition and arms. You even used the term weapons zoo, pointing out that it is more a collection of different types. How large is that problem?
I need to emphasize that that's not my term. That was used by the former Ukrainian Defense Minister Brezhnikov, who said that I need to operate a military zoo. And that's the best description you can imagine when it comes to describing the number of different weapons systems that the Ukrainian army uses. It partially originates from the problem that Ukrainians needed to go and ask for help for different countries and then took whatever was available to Ukraine at the moment. Partially the problem is that NATO itself and the EU itself didn't manage to solve this problem for many decades, because first of all, the number of platforms employed in the EU member states, is 6 times as high as the US, for instance, using. And so you need to produce not only a weapon system per se, but also ammunition and spare part, and that all complicates the logistics, not only in the EU, because that's one of the problems, because you need to get a special military permission to cross an internal border between the EU member states, and then it takes, well, the EU had its objective to reach a 5-day permission issuing term several years ago, and this objective has not been yet achieved. So it's the logistical problem on the EU side, and then you can imagine the logistical difficulties that Ukraine faces when it has to organize the delivery of different weapons platforms and systems to the front line, and then also ensure that there is enough spare parts and ammunition and et cetera, available for the soldiers. And so that's the problems that did not originate in Ukraine per se, but was, so to say, imported to Ukraine with Western aid. A similar problem of different root causes exists in the EU training for Ukraine here in Germany, because after an accident last year at one of the training sites, the Bundeswehr decided not to use Kalashnikov rifles for training anymore, and they had to switch for German rifles, which are absolutely different. And out of 6 weeks of a training program, the Bundeswehr now has to spend a week just to get those soldiers adjust to a new weapon or to a new rifle that they will never use when they're back in Ukraine. So this military zoo is a real problem when it comes to training, when it comes to fighting, and solving it, and I'm going to throw the buzzword interoperability, interchangeability, the objectives that NATO has been trying to achieve for many decades, is what also going to improve the successes of the Ukrainian army on the front line, the successes in training programs, and also the successes and the level of interoperability and ability to work together in Europe, even in peacetime.
And exactly as correctly our viewers mentioned, Ukraine needs ammunition, and Ukraine needs more than weapons. It cannot be counted as a success when Ukraine gets 30 years old weapons in low quantities without ammunition to say, no, you fight.
Also because the problem is that the amount of ammunition available in stock is limited. And so if you use those Soviet time weapon system, the only countries that you can go to and ask for more ammunition are Russia-friendly. And so you get a system and you're happy that you got something, but there is no ammunition, no spare parts to use it. What are you going to do about it?
Well, it is a $1 million question, and we definitely would be happy to discuss it further and try to find a solution. But our time for this panel is coming to its end. Don't forget to share this program. Don't forget to subscribe to both channel, European Resilience Initiative Center and Silicon Curtain. You will have next panel, Jonathan Fink, who you missed, and as I saw in the comments, and you will have it for sure. Don't forget to use the donation link and open the donation link in the commentary in the description section of this video. We are providing the Ukrainian army with needed equipment, which we may bring as a German organization for their needs, and this equipment is highly needed. We are talking to the soldiers in the field and asking them directly what they need and how we can help them. You're in the middle of 8 hours TV marathon in support for Ukraine. We are going now for a short break with a pre-recorded interview, especially for this TV marathon. And after that, we will switch back to live. Don't switch off.